Nobody ever sat me down and told me I was being used. That's not how it happens. There's no moment where somebody looks across the table at you in a restaurant in Provenza and says, "Listen, I don't actually like you. I like what your bank account does for my month." If that ever happened, none of this would be a problem. You'd know. You'd leave. What actually happens is slower and much stupider than that. What actually happens is you wake up one morning 7 months in, sitting in an apartment you're paying for, looking at a phone bill you're paying for, next to a woman whose mother's name you know but whose mother you have never met, and you do the math for the first time, really do it, out loud, on paper, and the number is $41,000. That was me, April 2021, El Poblado. And the worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was realizing that every single warning sign had been there from about week 3, and I had personally explained away every one of them, because I wanted the story I was telling myself more than I wanted the truth. I'm Luke. I've spent the last 7 years moving between cities in Latin America, and about 18 months of that has been in Medellín across 4 separate stays. By the end of this video, you'll have 12 specific signals I now watch for. But more useful than that, you'll understand why 11 of them are actually about you, not about her. Because that's the part nobody says out loud. If you're considering doing something similar, or you just want to know what it's actually like, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let me take you back to how I ended up $41,000 stupider. I came back to Medellín in September 2020 for what was supposed to be 3 months. I'd done a stint there in 2019, liked it, knew the layout, knew where the coffee was good. I wasn't running from anything, and I wasn't looking for anything. I had a remote consulting gig that paid me around $6 grand a month for maybe 18 hours of work a week, and Medellín in 2020 was the cheapest good life on the planet if you had dollars. I took a 1-bedroom in Manila, that little pocket between Poblado proper and Provenza, the one with the old houses and the trees, before it got completely overrun. $1,200 a month, furnished, doorman, gym in the building. That's an important number to remember, because at the time I thought I was being conservative. $1,200 in Denver gets you a studio with a view of a parking structure. $1,200 in Manila in 2020 got me a life that felt, to a guy from Colorado, borderline aristocratic. That's the first thing that goes wrong, and it goes wrong before you meet anybody. The exchange rate does something to your judgment. When the peso was at 3,800 to the dollar, everything felt free. A steak dinner for 2 with wine was $40. A weekend in Guadalupe was $200. When money stops registering as a real cost, you stop using money as information, and money is information. It's one of the only honest signals you have about what somebody actually wants from you, not because generous people are suspects, but because the pattern of money over time tells you something that words don't. I met Catalina in week 2, not at a club, not on an app, at a coffee place on KA 10 where I was working most mornings. She was 29. She'd studied graphic design at a university in Medellín. She had a job at a small agency downtown that paid her something like $900 a month, which is a genuinely decent professional salary there. Everything about her checked out. That's worth sitting with for a second, because the version of this story people expect involves a 22-year-old from a rough part of the city who doesn't speak English and appeared out of nowhere. That's not what this was. Catalina had a career, an apartment in Laureles she shared with a roommate, a degree, opinions about design software, and a family she talked about constantly. She was also, and I want to be precise here, not a con artist. I don't think Catalina woke up one morning and decided to run a scheme on an American. What happened was more ordinary and more human than that, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. What happened is that a dynamic formed early, neither of us named it, and then it just grew. The way weeds grow, nobody plants them. Here's the central thing I want you to understand before I give you a single sign. Exploitation in this context is almost never a plan. It's a slope, and the signs I'm about to give you are not signs that a woman is a bad person. They're signs that you're standing on the slope. The first real signal showed up around week 3, and it was so small I want to describe it exactly. We'd been seeing each other maybe 8 or 9 times, and in that time she had asked me almost nothing about my life in the US. Not out of coldness, she was warm, she was affectionate, she was present, but she had never asked what my job actually was, what I did before, whether I had siblings, why I left. What she had asked, twice, in a light and completely charming way, was what I paid for the apartment in Manila. That's sign 1, and it's the one I'd rank most reliable of all 12. The logistics of your money arrive in the conversation before the shape of your life does. Normal curiosity moves in a specific order. People want to know who you are, then what you do, then eventually, if things get serious, what your finances look like. Because that's a real thing, partners eventually discuss. When that order gets inverted, when somebody knows your rent before they know your mother's name, something is organizing that curiosity. It's not proof. It's a flag. Write it down and keep watching. Sign 2 showed up right behind it. Every plan she proposed had a price attached, and every price was in a place that takes dollars. I want to be careful here, because this one gets misread constantly by guys in the comments of every video like this. A woman suggesting dinner is not a woman using you. A woman suggesting a nice dinner is not a woman using you. Medellín has a real restaurant culture, and people there love going out. That's not a scam, that's a city. The signal isn't a single expensive suggestion. The signal is the absence of the other kind. In 4 months, Catalina never once proposed something that cost nothing. Never a walk in Envigado, never her cooking at her place, never a Sunday at the botanical garden, never a movie at home. Every proposal routed through my card. And I didn't notice for months because I liked the restaurants. Here's your test, and it costs you nothing to run. Over any 4-week window, count how many plans came from her that had no price tag. If the answer is 0, you're not dating, you're subscribing. Sign 3 took longer to see, and it's the one that cost me the most. The family emergency that has a rhythm. Month 2. Catalina's mother needed a medical procedure. $800. I paid it without a second of hesitation, and I'd pay it again. I want to be clear that I don't regret that one. Family medical costs in Colombia are real. The public system has real gaps. And if you're sitting on $6,000 a month, and someone you care about needs $800 for their mother, you pay it. That's not being used. That's being a person. Month 3. A cousin's tuition. $1,200. Month 4. The mother again. Follow-up. $600. Month 5. A brother's motorcycle got stolen. He needed it for work. $1,900. Any one of those, in isolation, is a story that could be completely true. I still don't know which of them were. Probably some. Maybe most. That's not the point. And this is the part that took me years to understand. The signal is not whether the emergencies are real. The signal is that they never resolve. In 7 months, not one of those situations ever reached a conclusion. Nobody ever got better, graduated, got hired, got the bike back. There was never a moment where the family situation improved. The emergencies functioned like a subscription, not like events. Real crises have arcs. They start, they're awful, they resolve, or they change shape. A permanent, undifferentiated stream of urgent needs that never once concludes is not a family situation, it's a channel. Sign 4 is the one I'd put on a billboard if I could. By month 5, I had never been to Laurel's. 7 months. I had never seen the inside of her apartment, never met the roommate, never met a friend of hers, never met the mother whose surgery I paid for. There were always reasons, and the reasons were always plausible. The roommate's a nightmare. My mother is old-fashioned and would ask when we're getting married. My friends are boring. You'd hate it. Every reason was individually believable. Collectively, they were a wall. Understand what a wall like that is actually doing. It's not hiding a secret boyfriend, usually. It's simpler than that. It's keeping the relationship inside a container, where the only version of you that exists is the version that pays for things, and the only version of her that exists is the version you meet at the restaurant. No friends means nobody says, "Wait, how much did he give you?" No family means no one asks me, "What is this actually?" The isolation is load-bearing. It protects the arrangement from anybody's judgment, including hers. Sign 5 is the mirror of that. Your own people vanish. I had a decent circle in Medellín by then. 2 other American guys who'd been there for years. A Canadian who ran a hostel in Laurel's. A Colombian guy named Julian I played tennis with in Envigado. By month 4, I was seeing basically none of them. It happened without a single argument. There was just always a conflict, always a reason, and every time I did make plans with Julian, the day would somehow acquire friction. She'd be upset about something unrelated. We'd end up talking it through. The tennis wouldn't happen. Here's why that one matters more than any other. Julian would have spotted this in 90 seconds. Any local friend would have. The thing that separates the guys who lose $4,000 from the guys who lose $40,000 is not intelligence. It's whether there was one person in their life with enough context to say, "Hermano, what are you doing wrong?" Isolation is what turns a small mistake into a long one. Sign 6 is subtle, and it's specific to being a foreigner. She manages the flow of information. My Spanish in 2020 was decent, conversational, not fluent. Catalina's English was better than my Spanish. So English became our language, and that was comfortable, and that comfort cost me a fortune. What it meant in practice, when we were with anyone else, when a landlord called, when there was a conversation with a repairman or a doctor's office or her family on speaker, I was hearing a summary. I was never hearing the thing itself. I was living in a translation, and the translator had an interest in the outcome. I'm not saying she lied in those translations. I'm saying I had no way to know, and I built a life on top of that not knowing. The tactical takeaway is not get a girlfriend who translates less. It's learn the language. Not for romance, for information. Every month you can't understand the room is a month somebody else decides what the room said. I want to know, how many of you watching this are seriously thinking about doing something similar? Drop the city you're thinking about in the comments. I read all of them. All right, the next batch of signs are the ones that require you to be honest about your own behavior, so brace up. Sign 7. The relationship moved faster than any relationship you've ever had, and you took that as evidence of how good it was. Catalina and I were spending nearly every night together by week 5. She had things at my apartment by week 6. By month 2, we were talking about her moving in, and by month 3, she had, informally, without either of us deciding. At the time I read that speed is chemistry. I was 33. I'd come out of a demolition of an engagement 2 years earlier, and here was somebody who wanted to be around me constantly, and had zero interest in the 3-month American courtship dance of ambiguity. I thought I'd found something better than what I'd left. Some of that was even true. A lot of what's genuinely good about dating in Latin America is exactly that directness, that absence of games, that willingness to just be with somebody. But speed does something structural, regardless of anyone's intentions. It compresses the timeline during which you'd normally gather information. In a relationship that develops over a year, you meet the friends, you see how she handles stress, you see her with money over multiple cycles, you watch her keep or break small promises 50 times. In a relationship that reaches cohabitation in 90 days, you have none of that. You've replaced evidence with intensity. Sign 8 is the escalation ladder, and it's mechanical. Look at those numbers again in order. 800, 1200, 600, 1900. Then, month 6, a laptop for her work, 2200. Then a family trip to the coast that I funded, about 3000. The trajectory isn't random. Each ask is calibrated slightly above the last one that succeeded. That's not necessarily conscious. That's just how any behavior works when it gets rewarded. If 800 works, 1200 gets tried. Nobody has to be scheming for the ladder to exist. It builds itself out of your yeses. Which means the counter is stupidly simple and almost nobody does it. Write the numbers down. Not to be suspicious, to be able to see a shape. A shape is invisible when you're inside it one transaction at a time. 6 months of numbers on one page is a diagnosis. Sign 9. Conflict resolves through purchase. We fought maybe once a month, nothing dramatic, and I noticed, later, going back through it, that essentially every disagreement ended in the same shape. Tension, distance, a day of coolness, and then a resolution that involved a trip being booked or something being bought or an amount being sent, and then warmth returning immediately and completely. I want to be careful about the word manipulation here, because I don't think either of us understood what we were doing. But when the reliable exit from every conflict is a transaction, you've trained a system, and you trained it. I trained it. Every single time I made discomfort go away with money, I taught both of us that money is the mechanism by which discomfort goes away. Sign 10 is one almost nobody talks about, and I only recognized it in hindsight. She never asks about your future in a way that includes her doing anything. Catalina talked about the future constantly. Where we'd travel, a house someday, where we'd live, what it would be like. She was warm about it, and I think in some real way she meant it. But in 7 months of future talk, she never once described a version of the future where she was contributing something. Not money. I don't mean money. I mean anything. Not a plan for her own career, not a thing she wanted to build, not a version of the two of us where she carried some load. Every future was one where I did the thing and she was present for it. That's the tell. Not selfishness. A lot of people are selfish and never take a dollar from anybody. It's that the imagined future has no role in it for her beyond being there. If you're doing all the verbs in every fantasy about your life together, then what's being enjoyed isn't a partnership, it's a position. Sign 11 is uncomfortable because it points at you. You started hiding numbers from yourself. Around month 4, I stopped checking my accounts weekly, which I had done religiously since I was 24. I told myself it was because I was relaxed, because I'd finally stopped being neurotic about money, because this was the whole point of leaving Denver. That wasn't it. I stopped looking because looking felt bad, and when a man who has tracked his money his whole adult life suddenly develops a peaceful relationship with not knowing his balance, that is not personal growth. That's avoidance dressed up as growth. The general form: whenever you find yourself constructing a flattering explanation for a change in your own behavior, look harder. I've since noticed that the moment I start narrating myself as a more evolved person, I'm usually about to do something dumb. And sign 12, the one that ends the argument, the one you can actually run as a test rather than just watch for. Month 7, I finally did the math. $41,000 over 7 months, on top of rent, on top of everything. I didn't confront her because I'm not proud enough to pretend I was brave about it. What I did was quieter and more cowardly and, accidentally, the smartest thing I did that whole year. I proposed a normal life. I said, I want to stop going out 5 nights a week. I want to cook at home more. I want to meet your friends, meet your mother, come to Laurel's. I want to go to Sabaneta on Sundays and do nothing. I told her I was scaling back, that I'd overextended, that I needed 6 months of just being two people who liked each other, without the machine of it. I didn't say a word about the $41,000. I just described a relationship with no money in it. She was gone in 9 days. Not dramatically. There was no fight, no accusation, nothing ugly. She got busy. Then she got distant. Then there was a conversation about how things had changed, and she was right. Things had changed. And then it was over. That's sign 12, and it's the only one that isn't really a sign. It's an experiment, and it's available to you anytime you want it, and it costs nothing. Propose the version of the relationship that has no money in it, and see whether the relationship survives the proposal. Not a test you spring on somebody as a trap. Just a real, sincere, gently delivered description of a quieter life together. Any relationship that's actually about two people can absorb that easily. There might be disappointment, there might be adjustment, there might even be an honest conversation about your finances, which is a normal thing partners have. What can't survive it is an arrangement. Now let me tell you what men get wrong about all of this, because I've been in Medellín 4 separate times since 2019, and I've watched more guys get this backwards than get it right, including in the direction of paranoia. The biggest mistake isn't falling for it. The biggest mistake is what guys do after they hear a story like mine, which is that they walk into the country armed with 12 signs and a suspicion, and they start running everybody through a filter designed to detect a crime that most people aren't committing. I watch this constantly in Provenza. A guy who's read too many forums, 20 months into his 2nd year, who can't accept a woman letting him pay for a $40 dinner without deciding it means something. Who interprets normal warmth as strategy? Who's so busy defending a fortress that nothing real can get in or out? That guy is not safe. He's just alone, and he's insufferable, and, this is the part he never sees, he's actually the easiest mark in the room, because his paranoia is entirely about small amounts. He'll refuse to buy a cocktail and then hand somebody $4,000 for a business idea in month 3, because he never learned to read the shape of a thing, only the price of it. Second mistake, confusing economic asymmetry with exploitation. If you're making $6,000 a month and she's making $900 and you go to dinner, you are going to pay for dinner. That's not a scam, that's arithmetic. In a lot of the country, the cultural default is that the man handles the check, and that default exists independent of you and your passport. A woman operating inside a normal cultural expectation is not running a play on you. If you can't tell the difference between local norms and a con, The problem is that you don't know the place well enough yet to be dating in it seriously. Third mistake, and this one's mine to own. Thinking the danger is at the bottom of the market. When I got to Medellín the first time, my mental model of risk was cheap bars in the centro and girls off apps at 2 a.m. That's where I thought the sharks were. Then I lost $41,000 to a graphic designer with a degree who I met at a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. The high-cost version of this doesn't come at you through a club. It comes through something that looks exactly like the life you actually wanted, because that's the only thing you'd stay inside of for 7 months. Fourth mistake. Believing you'd know. Every guy this happens to believed he'd know. I had run enterprise sales cycles against professional procurement teams whose entire job was extracting concessions from people like me, and I was good at it, and none of that transferred at all. Because in a sales negotiation, you know you're in a negotiation. Here you think you're in love, and you have no framework that treats love as a place where information should be gathered. The skill doesn't fail. The skill just never gets switched on. And the fifth thing men get wrong, which is really the whole video underneath the video, they think the question is she using me? When the question is, what am I offering that isn't money? Because here's the thing I couldn't see in 2021 and can see clearly now, 4 years and a lot of humility later. If you take a hard, honest look at what I actually brought to Catalina, I was a guy who worked 18 hours a week, had no local friends by month 4, spoke intermediate Spanish, had no plans, no project, nothing being built, no future I could describe that was mine. I was a wallet with a personality attached, and I have to accept some responsibility for the fact that a wallet is what got treated like a wallet. That's not self-flagellation, it's the most useful thing I know, because the 12 signs are all defensive, and defense has a ceiling. The actual protection is being a man for whom the money is the least interesting thing on offer. So what does that look like in practice? Let me get specific, because I don't want to leave you with philosophy. First, fix your Spanish before you fix your dating life. Not tourist Spanish. Real, argue with a landlord, understand a joke you weren't included in Spanish. I got to that level in 2022 and it changed the texture of everything. When you can understand the room, nobody gets to be your interpreter, and the entire category of foreigner-specific problems shrinks by half. 6 months of 2 hours a day, that's the whole cost. Second, build a local social circle before you build a relationship, and refuse to let the relationship eat it. Not other expats, locals. That means something structured, because adults don't make friends by wandering around. For me it's been tennis in Envigado, and a climbing gym in Laureles. When Catalina and I were at month 5, I had drifted away from every person who could have told me the truth. Now I have a rule. If a woman I'm seeing and my Tuesday tennis conflict, the tennis wins, every time, for the first 3 months. Nobody who's good for you objects to that. The objection itself is the information. Third, keep a number. 1 spreadsheet, 1 line a week. What did I spend on this relationship? It takes 90 seconds. It's not distrust. I'd do it if I were dating an heiress. It exists because human beings cannot perceive a trend from inside it, and the entire failure mode I'm describing is a trend, not an event. Fourth, never let generosity be reactive. This is the one I'd most want a guy in his first month to hear. I now decide in advance what I'm willing to give, and I give it when nothing is happening. If somebody I care about has a family medical situation, I'll help. Genuinely, without resentment, and I've done it since. But I'll do it on a Wednesday when everything is calm. What I will not do anymore is transfer money at the end of a fight, or at the peak of an emotional moment, or in the 24 hours after something went wrong between us. Generosity in a calm room is generosity. Generosity in a hot room is a payment, and both of you will learn what it bought. Fifth, go to her neighborhood, in the first 6 weeks. Not as a test, as a normal thing that happens between people who are seeing each other. Meet one friend. See where she lives. If 60 days pass and you have not been admitted into any part of her actual life, you don't have a relationship, you have a service. The 7 months I spent never seeing Laureles is the single dumbest fact in this entire story. Sixth, pace it deliberately. I now won't let anyone move in inside of 6 months, and I don't say that as a rule for you. I say it because I need 4 seasons of information before I can see somebody clearly. If that pacing makes something fall apart, it was going to fall apart later at a much higher price. And seventh, have something you're building. This is the real answer, and everything else is technique. The men I know who've been down here a long time and are actually doing well, who have real relationships with women who have their own lives, all have one thing in common. Their days are full of something that isn't leisure and isn't women. A business, a craft, a training regimen, a real career, something. The men who get hollowed out are the ones who arrived with money and no project, because 7 years of nothing is a long time, and it makes you into exactly the thing that attracts the wrong arrangement. Medellín will give you back whatever you bring into it. That sounds like a fortune cookie, but I've watched it be true for 7 years. Guys who arrive with a life get a life there. Guys who arrive with only a currency advantage end up in a relationship with their currency advantage, and eventually, so does everyone around them. So, 12 signs. Money before biography. Every plan priced. Emergencies that never resolve. Never seeing her real life. Losing your own friends. Living inside a translation. Speed you mistake for chemistry. Asks that climb. Fights that end in purchases. A future where you do all the verbs, and you, quietly, not looking at your accounts anymore. And then the 12th, which isn't a sign but a test you can run tonight. Describe a version of the relationship with no money in it, and watch what happens next. But here's what I actually want you to take out of this, because I don't think the signs are the valuable part. I lost $41,000 in Medellín, and I would pay it again for what it taught me, which is this. I was never really deceived. I was accommodated. Catalina gave me the exact relationship I was set up to receive. A man with no local roots, no language, no friends, no project, and a lot of money will get a relationship organized around money, and it doesn't require anybody to be a villain for that to happen. The arrangement forms on its own, out of the shape of what you brought. Which means the 12 signs are useful the way a smoke detector is useful. Worth having. Doesn't build the house. The men who do well down here aren't the suspicious ones. They're the ones with enough going on that money is the least interesting thing they're offering, and who therefore never have to squint at anybody, because they can see the whole room. If you got something from this, hit subscribe. I'm in a different city every few months, and the next videos get into what a year in this life actually costs, and the parts of it nobody puts in the highlight reel. See you on the road.